Right before we jump into this 1 year later review of the Canon EOS R3, I want to let you know that this video is brought to you by Squarespace, but more on that at the end of this video. Jared Polin, FroKnowsPhoto.com, and it's been just about a year since Canon released their not flagship EOS R3 into the world. Now, after teasing the R3 for months and making it a point to remind us that it's not actually their flagship camera, I had one in my hands. Now, some of you may be wondering if you somehow missed my initial review of the R3, and the answer to that question is I never actually put one out. What I did put out was a bunch of different tests and first thought videos, but not a full review. Though Steven and I did film a full day real world review style video at my friend Will's recording studio with the band Soulblind. Now, before I jump into the specs and the full review, I want to let you know that the R3 has become my go-to camera, replacing Sony's A1 as my daily driver. Now, don't get me wrong, Sony's A1 is an amazing camera with unbelievable specs. In fact, there's some specs in it that I would love to see come to the R3. I did capture great images with the A1, but after using the R3 out in the real world, I simply felt it and Canon's lineup of RF glass was better for me, so I made the switch. At this point, I've taken over 26,000 photos across a ton of different shoots. I've captured everything from soccer matches to kids playing on the playground, skateboarders, football games, kickboxing, ice hockey, professional bowling, family birthday parties, bands recording in low light, Steven kissing his bride, best-selling authors, and Major League Baseball. So basically, I've shot a little bit of everything with the R3 in the last year. Here's a rundown of what I think are the most important specs. The R3 sports a 24.1 megapixel BSI stacked CMOS sensor that was manufactured and developed by Canon. The stacked sensor allows the R3 to capture 14-bit RAW files at up to 30 frames per second with the electronic shutter and 12 frames per second with the mechanical one, though I haven't taken one photo with the mechanical shutter since having the camera. You have a max burst rate of 150 photos, which is 5 full seconds with the electronic shutter. Once again, if you can't nail the shot in 5 seconds, there might be a problem, and that problem is probably you. Now, speaking of problems, is it a problem that it has dual card slots, with one being an SD and the other being a CF Express Type B? We'll get more on that a little later. The ISO range goes from 100 to 102,400 natively and is expandable up to 204,800, though I've never actually shot at max ISO, native or otherwise. There's a Digic X processor that powers the dual pixel AF version 2, which in my book is the best autofocus in the game. The EVF is 5.76 million dots with 120 frames per second refresh rate. The EVF itself looks to be much larger because it needs room for Canon's eye control tech. Now you have a 3.2-inch vari-angle touchscreen, digital hot shoe, super solid image stabilization of up to 8 stops when paired with certain RF glass. And speaking of RF glass, there's a ton of Pro glass already available, and I can only assume even more is on the way. All of this is wrapped into an amazing feeling body with a built-in grip, smart controller, tons of mappable buttons, and much more. Now, even though I focus primarily on still images, the R3 is a fully capable video camera, which I'll hit on more by the end of this video. The R3 will set you back $5,999 in the US and something like $47,000 in Canada.
You, buddy.
So how does it hold up a year later? Honestly, not a lot has changed since it came out, but some things have changed in my eyes. The reason being, I couldn't see myself reaching for the R3 when the specs of Sony's A1 on paper seemed better in my mind. A 50 megapixel camera capable of shooting up to 30 frames per second with amazing AF, nice lens selection, and matching dual card slots. But the more I shot with the R3 and the RF glass, the more I fell in love with the entire system. My personal reasons for not reaching for the R3 earlier were simple. One, the A1 was 50 megapixels. 2, I couldn't record the EVF, which I love doing to help teach you guys out there. And 3, what if I liked it? For real, what if I actually liked it? It turns out I didn't just like it, I loved it. Now let's start getting into the nitty-gritty. Did Canon pull a switcheroo on everyone? What I mean by that is, was the R3 really supposed to be the R1, but when Sony announced a 50 megapixel A1, Canon decided to rename it the R3 and tell us that the R1 would be coming later? That's a discussion that we've had over here, but we may never know, and honestly, who really cares? So is 24 megapixels enough? I always hear that 24 megapixels isn't enough. Now, would I prefer to have 50 like the A1? 100% yes. But the real question is, when's the last time that you blew up a photo to 4 feet by 6 feet? Why, thank you for asking, Jared, because I did just that 21 times recently. Now, all of these photos are 4 feet by 6 feet, with some of them being from a 12 megapixel crop Nikon D2X. That's right, not even a full frame sensor, and they still look amazing. So the idea that 24 megapixels in a pro body isn't enough today is simply bullshit, unless you're this guy. You know, my good friend and hockey photographer Bruce Bennett, who loves to crop, thus why he still uses the R5 and why I call him King Cropper. I've been extremely happy with the files I've gotten from the R3, from base ISO to roughly 8,000 ISO and everywhere in between. My colors pop and my black and whites look thick and contrasty. Now, I say roughly 8,000 ISO as I rarely push higher thanks to faster glass. Now, with all of that being said, would I like to have more megapixels? Sure. Why not? But there's more to a camera than just megapixels. There's the overall feel of the body, the button layout, the card slots, the autofocus, EVF, LCD screen, and of course, glass. I'd like to focus on the glass for this next section. So far, Canon has crushed it with Pro RF glass. From day one, they had a 28-70 f2, a $3,000 chode of a lens that is always in my bag, except for when I'm using it, then it's not actually in my bag. They have a 50 and an 85 1.2, 100 macro, 70 to 200 2.8, and of course, some big ass pro glass in the way of the 400 2.8 and 600 f4. They even offer some mega zooms like the 100 to 500, but currently they lack in the ultra wide pro front. One of the drawbacks of the RF lineup currently is they do not have anything wider than the 14mm of the 14 to 35 f4 RF. So for now, I've had to adapt the Canon 11 to 24 f4 EF. It's fine, it works, it gets the job done, but I want wide pro RF glass. And at some point, I think they'll come out with it. Since I'm talking about glass, I have to jump in here with the absolute worst thing about the RF system, the back caps for the lenses. You have to line them up perfectly, which generally requires 2 hands. I know this sounds like a small issue, but when I'm switching lenses and on the move, I need to be able to put the back caps on my lenses and not have to worry that when I pick my bag up, they're gonna go flying one way and my lenses aren't covered. Okay, rant over. What good is glass if the camera's autofocus system can't drive it? Thankfully, that's not a question or concern when it comes to the R3, because the autofocus is super sticky, super accurate, super customizable, and blazingly fast both with RF and adapted EF lenses. Sony has had a major jumpstart over Nikon and Canon when it came to autofocus. I did not think that in such a short period of time, I would go from saying that Sony's AF is unmatched in the industry to saying it feels like the R3's autofocus edges out the A1. Now, mind you, it's ever so slight, but yes, in my experience using both systems, I feel the R3 is better as of now. Now, I say as of now because there's no way that Sony is sitting there going, "Oh shucks, we lost, let's throw in the towel." Because I can guarantee you that they're hard at work making their already great AF even better. The biggest revelation for me with mirrorless photography has been the introduction of IAF. Sony crushed the IF game with lock-on tracking, and now the Canon R3 has edged it out ever so slightly. I'm finding the eye and the face more consistently with the R3 no matter what I'm shooting. It could be baseball, football, or even portraits. It's fast, accurate, and sticky, which allows me to focus on composition and exposure because I know that the AF is going to do exactly what it needs to do. Now, some people will continue to say, back in the day we did it manual. Cool. Do you still ride horses to go to places?
Driving the old model, huh? Yeah.
The biggest takeaway with IAF for me is this: I am able to capture images I otherwise would have missed. There's times where action is happening so quick, and the best you can do is raise your camera and just start shooting. And guess what? There's a good chance you're gonna nail the shot because the AF just knows what to look for.
Let me jump in here real quick because I want to show you FroPak 3 in action on this photo taken with the Canon R3. Let's start with some prestige worldwide. Boom, one click, it looks great. Followed by Mount Airy, that gives it a nice look. Mentos, MDMA, King Contrast looks really good, and we've got Capone. But I want to go up to FroPak 1 because I want to show you this. This is Skittles. One click, and Skittles looks absolutely fantastic. So if you're looking to speed up your raw workflow or give yourself a great starting point on both mobile and desktop, we created 15 custom Lightroom presets that you can check out right now at FroKnowsPhoto.com/FroPak3. While you're over there, you can play with the sliders to see the befores and the afters, and if you decide to pick them up right now, they are currently on sale. Or if you want to save even more and get Skittles as part of FroPak 1, you can get the triple play bundle of FroPak 1, 2, and 3 and save even more. Now, let's get back to the 1 year later.
The biggest revelation for me with the R3's autofocus system is how fantastic it is with 1.2 lenses. The fact that you can photograph a kid running towards you at 30 frames per second wide open at 1.2 with the 85 RF and nail the eye just about every time is kind of mind-blowing. A concern I had when the R3 was announced was that it had dual card slots, but with two different mediums. There's the newer, quicker, more expensive CF Express Type B slot and a UHS-2 SD card slot. In older Canons, we saw shooting speeds hindered when trying to shoot to both cards, SD and whatever else the camera had. Thankfully, my concerns were unfounded and I have not outrun this camera yet, meaning I have not had to wait for my raw images to be written to the slower SD card slot in order to continue my shooting. A part of the reason that you won't outrun this camera is the file size. Less megapixels equals smaller file size. Now we're talking around 26 to 30 megabytes a file versus the Sony A1, which is 100 megabytes every time you take an uncompressed raw image. Now with that being said, I still would have preferred two CF Express Type B slots, but thankfully it hasn't been an issue for me. There's always talk about how one camera's menu system is horrible while someone else's is so much better. I do think some menu systems are designed poorly, but at the end of the day, the more you use a specific menu system, the more proficient you become in using it. Canon has been following the same tried and true menu system for years. Everything's color-coded. Everything's easy to find, even if you're using the R3 or the new R10 or even something like an SL2, the menu is going to function similarly. Now let's talk about the body. And no, Steven, we're not talking about this body this time. The R3 is the best feeling flagship style camera on the market right now because it just fits in your hand, even though it has a bigger battery and a built-in vertical grip. The R3 is lighter than the R5 with a grip and two batteries installed. Now, everyone who picks up the R3 for the first time comments the same thing. It's so damn light. And when a camera is this light, people are going to question its durability. And all I can say about that is, so far so good for me. I've taken it all over the country and shot in hot and cold climates and everywhere in between. Now, continuing on with the feel, let's talk about the shutter button. It's just perfectly responsive. Even though it has the power to shoot 30 frames per second, I can still grab a single shot and not zap off 3 or 4 when I'm trying to get just one. With the Sony A1, it's basically impossible to snap off just one shot when you're in the high frame rate modes. The decades of designing and creating professional bodies really shows with the choices Canon made with the R3. The buttons are in the right places, they are highly adaptable and mappable to your preferences, which is always a nice thing to have. I do think Sony takes it a step further with a few more buttons and the option to map basically all of them, but the R3 flat out crushes it in the hands. What's funny is I almost forgot to mention eye control. The simple reason why is I don't use it. It's an interesting idea, but for the things that I shoot, it just doesn't make sense to use. On top of that, you need to calibrate it in every lighting situation at least once, if not twice, and you have to do it horizontally and vertically. In theory, it's a good idea, and for some people it may be useful, but for me, it's not useful, so I keep it turned off. But what is useful for me is the EVF. It's big, it's vibrant, it's crisp and accurate to the final exposure. When using the electronic shutter, which is 99.9% of the time, you get blackout-free shooting. I've seen a lot of people questioning how's the blackout shooting in the viewfinder of XYZ camera, and I can tell you that blackout has never been an issue for me, even going back to the film days. It is what it is. It's not like you somehow lose all sense of space and time when that shutter snaps, or in the case of the Z9, A1, and R3, when the electronic shutter fires. I know I've talked a lot about the photo features, but like every modern mirrorless camera these days, the R3 is a fully capable and stacked video camera. You can capture 6K internal raw video up to 60 frames per second, full width 4K downsampled from 6K up to 60 frames per second, and 4K up to 120 frames per second for slow-mo. The only caveat there is that it's not a full pixel readout at 120 frames per second. Granted, most other cameras do the same except for a select few, like the Sony a7S III. All of this can be done with unlimited record time with no overheating as well. Now, I personally don't shoot a ton of video, but when I was on the road with the PBA, which are professional bowlers, and needed to capture video, it worked as you would expect. I preset 2 custom setting functions. One was for 4K 24 and the other was for 4K 120 slow motion. All I needed to do was flick the switch from photo mode to video mode, compose my shot, let the AF do its thing, and bam, I got solid video. Is the R3 a perfect camera? No. There's no such thing as a perfect camera. There's always going to be things that you like and don't like in a camera or a camera's brand. You need to decide for yourself where compromises can be made and where they cannot be. The biggest compromise for me going with the R3 is that I'm not able to record my EVF like I can do with the Nikon Z9. Now, that isn't a problem for 99.9999999% of the world, but for someone who likes to use the EVF recording as a teaching tool, it's kind of a big deal. It's my hope that Canon finally hears me and decides to they actually do hear me, but they haven't done anything about it yet, but maybe one day they will unlock this feature and we can get back to recording my EVF. The other compromise I made was going from 50 megapixels in the A1 to 24 in the R3. I love having 50, but like I said earlier, 24 isn't something to sneeze at. At the end of the day, the R3 is an amazing camera for those who need it and can afford it. Clocking in at $6,000, it's sandwiched between the Z9 at $5,500 and the A1 at $6,500 without a grip. The RF lens lineup is already strong and will continue to get better and better as the system matures. I'd personally like to see a 135, 1.8, or 1.4, as well as a 200 f2 or 1.8, and something super wide and awesome. The autofocus and feel of the body is really what won me over. I have no idea how far they can push it, but where it's at now is already pretty amazing. My biggest question is this: what can Canon bring to an R1 that will truly differentiate it from the R3 without making it an $8,000 body? Will it have more megapixels? Will it shoot faster? Will the autofocus get even better? Only time will tell. But for now and the foreseeable future, the R3 is my personal choice when I reach for a camera. So thank you guys very much for watching. Jared Polin, FroKnowsPhoto.com. See ya.
I want to thank Squarespace for sponsoring this video. If you're looking to build your very own online portfolio, use what I use and have been using for more than 10 years now for my own personal website, jaredpolin.com. The reason I use Squarespace is it's simple, easy, affordable, and I don't need to know coding. So if you'd like to get your 14-day free trial, head on over to squarespace.com/FroKnowsPhoto. If you decide that it's for you, use the code FroKnowsPhoto at checkout to get 10% off your first order.